Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig Bonby. I recently did a video on Elvis's final album, Moody Blue. Like a lot of singers I talk about on this channel who were important to me when I was younger, I generally consumed Elvis through greatest hits albums and became curious about going back and listening to the albums as they were actually released for the first time, what's referred to as the studio albums. Now, I quickly came to discover with Elvis, the notion of studio albums are less important than they would be for the Beatles. They were just sort of like lists of content that came out at a time and were often sort of awkwardly nailed together with bits from live shows or things that Elvis recorded very quickly. That said, I did decide that in addition to listening to his very last album, it would be fun to listen to his very first album, if for no other reason than this is iconic cover art. It went on to inspire The Clash. That said, I don't know if these CDs are made for people who think of it like me as, wanting to go through the Elvis canon and listen album by album. They added a lot of tracks to this. So the first two tracks on this album aren't actually from the original Elvis Presley record. So it kind of works just as listening to an early greatest hits album. So what I did is I went to Wikipedia and looked up, okay, where does the actual original Elvis Presley album start? And just focused on those songs, which go from tracks 3 to tracks 14 on this album, leaving behind tracks 1 and 2 and tracks 15 to 18 as additions. And look, there are some great additions to that. Elvis's, I believe, first #1 hit and Heartbreak Hotel was thrown onto this album. The second track on the album, I Was the One, I'd never heard it before, and it was actually pretty cool because it was a good showing of Elvis's deep voice. And usually the way I think of it is that later in Elvis's career, he pretty much exclusively used the deep voice, and it was impressive, but it always sounded kind of over the top and kitschy, whereas in his early career, where his voice was higher, it was free-flowing and expressive and rock and roll. And I like the early tracks where he uses a bit of the deep voice because it's a cool addition to the talent tool belt, but it still has that freedom, that nice free-flowing sound I associate more with the higher voice. So let's talk about the actual first Elvis Presley record, simply titled Elvis Presley. The first track is Blue Suede Shoes, the national anthem of rock and roll. This song is not upheld as one of the greatest Elvis songs only because it was already a hit for his contemporary Carl Perkins, and it's like Carl Perkins's one big song. That said, while Carl Perkins deserves all the credit in the world for coming up with the concept of the song, Elvis's voice is cleaner and richer, so it just takes the song to the next level. Track #2 is written by a guy called Don Robertson. It's called I'm Counting on You. This slows things down a bit to a ballad pace with a slight cowboy twang. What's great about this record is they really try to change the sound up a little bit in terms of pace or in terms of what instruments are recognized. So all the tracks on the album sound very distinct. With some rockabilly albums, everything might sound broadly the same. With some punk albums, which was trying to bring back the simplicity of rockabilly, everything might sound the same, but everything does not sound the same on this record. Every song tries to be special. Track #3, for example, is Elvis's cover of Ray Charles's I Got a Woman. And because it doesn't involve all the jazzy instruments that Ray Charles uses, but Elvis's simple acoustic guitar, electric guitar, bass guitar band, it sounds completely different. It really is its own version of the song. And not only that, but this may be the first song ever that Elvis added that kitschy signature thing where at the end he sort of slows down and he goes, I got a woman way over town. I don't have the voice to do the whole thing, but that sort of signature Elvis way of closing a song. Track #4 is One-Sided Love Affair by Bill Campbell. This is where Elvis's piano player Shorty Long really gets to stand out. And I mentioned that these songs all find ways to sound different. And one of the ways is young Elvis did all these cool things with enunciation, like he was playing characters, if just in a silly, lighthearted comedy way. So he plays a lot with enunciation on this song, and there's some funny pronunciations, and they're like, understanding. And this was apparently Elvis's favorite song on the album. And though it's not one you hear more these days, if you listen to it, you'll instantly hear why. It has a great upbeat 1950s sound to it, and it's quirky, but it still just works as a love pop song. Track #5 changes the sound up a bit. This is a song called I Love You Because, written by Leon Payne and made famous by the gentleman Jim Reeves. It has more of a serious feel. There's kind of like a Mexican romantic love song with some classical acoustic guitar licks. But, Elvis has a little bit of fun with his voice, and he sounds kind of like a whiny teenager in how he delivers the song. Not in a way that's off-putting, but just a little bit. He adds some personality to say, okay, this is a serious love song, but not too serious. To confuse things, after the song called I Love You Because, we get a song called Just Because. And it sounds completely different. It's written by Bob Shelton, Joe Shelton, and Sidney Robin. And it's more of a bluegrass tune. And this time the instrument they add to make it sound kind of different is a shaker. Elvis adds a bit of a Buddy Holly hiccup to his voice, or a pre-Buddy Holly hiccup, because Buddy Holly was not yet a big star. There's some nice guitar playing on the track. I was going to say it's Elvis's famous supporting guitar player, Scotty Moore, but on this single track, it might have been Chet Atkins instead. The lyrics are kind of quirky. They're about a woman who condescendingly calls a man Santa Claus because she can rely on him to buy her presents. And it's actually one of the older songs on this record. It was recorded back in 1929 by a Hawaiian group called Nell Stone's Hawaiians. Track number 7 is Tutti Frutti, the famous Little Richard song. And this one, I'm certain the guitar playing is Scotty Moore, and he does a great job on that. Beyond that, this is a kind of Rorschach test for how you think of Elvis. Two of the famous covers by white artists of Little Richard's Tutti Frutti were Elvis's version and Pat Boone's version. Pat Boone's version is hilarious. It's him singing as the caricature of a white man. I've got a gal named Sue. She knows just what to do. Whereas Elvis tries to sing the song pretty much like the original, and it's rocking and it's great. And it's nice that it has the addition of Elvis's nice baritone voice. So some people take the view, well, he's just copying Little Richard because he sounds like it. He didn't make it his own like Pat Boone. But I think most rock and roll fans would say, no, it's great that Elvis is copying Little Richard. It's a shame that bigger social equalities meant that Black artists might not have gotten equivalent fame to Elvis for their own contributions. But this shows that Elvis really understood what rock and roll and making fun, rebellious music was about. He wasn't a square like Pat Boone. Track number 8 is called Trying to Get to You. It's by a woman named Rosemary McCoy, who I believe recorded the original version, and Charlie Singleton. This is a dark horse candidate for one of my favorites, possibly the greatest Elvis song ever. So it's slightly slowed down from some of those other 1950 tracks. So Elvis really gets to lean into the epicness of his vocal delivery, but it's not corny. It's not one of those deep voice songs from later in his career. It makes the best of Elvis's early voice. Track number 9 is called I'm Gonna Sit Right Down and Cry. It's by Joe Thomas and Howard Biggs. And the first version was recorded only a couple years before this in 1954 by Roy Hamilton. It has a kind of a fun rockabilly sound to it with some nice catchy piano at the beginning. It's not necessarily the most memorable lyrics, but it's a nice use of vocal hooks from Elvis. Wanna sit right down and cry over you. Track number 10 is called I'll Never Let You Go, Little Darling by Jimmy Walkley. This is a soft little ballad, but then it jumps into a completely different part. So the one sort of vaguely experimental song on this record. Track number 11 is an interesting song. So this is a standard by Rodgers and Hart. It's called Blue Moon. You probably know it. Blue moon, you saw me standing alone. And I think it was seen as kind of a bit too jazzy for someone who was trying to be new and hip like Elvis Presley. There's an interesting choice with this record. The bridge of this song ends with, and suddenly the moon turned to gold, or something like that. So it's a song about being lonely and no longer being lonely. Yet for some reason, Elvis doesn't sing the bridge and he doesn't sing the last verse. Blue moon, now I'm no longer alone. He just sings the 2 verses about being alone and then goes into this weird haunting falsetto bit. And there's also this clippity clop sound in the background that I assume is Bill Black's bass. I believe it was one of the songs used in Jim Jarmusch's surreal movie inspired by Elvis music, Mystery Train. The album then ends with a song called Money Honey. This uses kind of cool, saloon-y sounding piano. It's a fine song to me. It doesn't really feel like a closer. I would have gone for something more epic, like Trying to Get to You, or possibly at least Blue Suede Shoes, because it's so darn catchy. That said, this is not an unspecial song. If you look at the lyrics, which were written by Jesse Stone and then originally recorded by the Drifters, Clyde McPhatter delivers a great eccentric vocal in his version. It is a somewhat interesting song. Rather than being a sort of 7-ring style shallow tune about, I want money, give me money, honey, It's actually a kind of a song of sad desperation because it starts out with a person not having any rent money to pay their landlord. Then they start being mad at their partners, like, I can't be with you unless you're going to give me money, honey, because I don't want to get evicted. So overall, great experience listening to Elvis Presley. If you only associate Elvis, end of his career, the big voice, the fancy suit in Las Vegas, go back and listen to this record and you'll realize why he was such a phenomenon. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.